Hello. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see familiar faces. Nice to see new faces. Just out of curiosity, how many people have not been to the Center for Brooklyn History? A few of you. Well, a special welcome to you, and I hope you'll come to many more programs and the other things we do. My name is Marcia Eli. I have the honor and pleasure always of welcoming you here on behalf of the Brooklyn Public Library, the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents, and of course all of my colleagues here at the Center for Brooklyn History. Tonight we are honored to welcome two-time Pulitzer Prize winner David Rohde, whose new and important book, Where Tyranny Begins, the Justice Department, the FBI, and the War on Democracy, sheds light on the strategies Donald Trump systematically used to turn the country's two most powerful law enforcement agencies into personal political weapons. We are enormously fortunate that another distinguished expert, Timothy Naftali, will be leading David in conversation. Following their discussion, there'll be time to take your questions. Our ushers will bring a mic to you. And as you probably saw as you came in, we are selling Where Tyranny Begins in the shop. It is a must-read in the next month. 50, how many days? David will sign books in the front. So now let me share just a few details about our distinguished guests and turn it over to them. I could really talk for a long time about these two experts, but we want to hear them. Investigative reporter David Rohde is a two-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize, as I mentioned. He is the senior executive editor of national security at NBC News and a former executive editor of the New Yorker's online website. There he wrote about the Justice Department, democracy, and disinformation. He is also a former New York Times, Reuters, and Christian Science Monitor reporter. His books include In Deep, the FBI, the CIA, and the Truth About America's Deep State, and of course, this newest book, Where Tyranny Begins. Timothy Naftali is Senior Research Scholar at the Institute of Global Politics at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Prior, he held a number of leadership positions at NYU focusing on public service and public policy. He is well known as a pioneer in the study of modern international and espionage history and is a well-recognized presidential historian. Naftali was the founding director of the Federal Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum, where he curated a nationally recognized, nonpartisan, and permanent exhibit on Watergate and oversaw the release of 1.3 million pages of records. And he's the author and co-author or editor of 8 books, including histories of U.S. counterterrorism policy and of presidential impeachment. Finally, Tim was a historical consultant to both, and this is a mouthful, the Nazi War Crimes and Imperial Japanese Government Records Interagency Working Group, and to the 9/11 Commission. He's currently a member of the State Department's Historical Advisory Committee and serves as a CNN presidential historian. We are deeply honored to host this tonight. Please help me welcome David Rohde and Timothy Naftali to the stage.
Get this right. Make sure it's on. It's on? First of all, my name's Tim Naftali, and I want to thank the Center for Brooklyn History for coming up with the idea to let David share his very important insights. And if you don't get a sense that his insights are important, I haven't done my job right. David, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really hoping that Tim is going to share his insights tonight. I want to interview him, actually.
No. All right, David, this is your 5th book. why did you write this book? What was the reason that you felt you not only needed to write this book, but write this book fast? Because you did write it fast.
My wife's not here yet, but if she was here, she asked me that same question constantly. Why are you writing this silly book? Why did you agree to write this book? What were you thinking? I'll be honest tonight, and I want to have a very relaxed, open conversation. We want to take questions from you. I identified lots of problems in our democracy, our legal system in this book. Lots of problems with sort of human nature that happened. But I really wanted to write and I might be almost naive, I'm a very committed sort of nonpartisan journalist. I work at NBC News now. My idol is Lester Holt. I do interviews now and then on MSNBC, but I really believe in the need for facts. And I tried to write a history that would tell the story of these tumultuous years. The book starts with Trump's arrival essentially in the Oval Office and the travel ban to this summer. Biden dropping out of the race and the various criminal investigations of Donald Trump. And I tried to write it through characters, the people who worked for decades in the Justice Department and the FBI, and how they dealt with the sort of unprecedented politics of our country today.
This book is a study of an attack, an assault on the Department of Justice, and as part of that, an assault on the FBI. And for those of us who watched the Trump era, we thought we knew most about this. And I'm sure many of you in this room would not be surprised if a nonpartisan observer wrote that former President Trump tried to undermine the Department of Justice. But reading your book, I learned things, quite a few things. And I was wondering if you could share with all of us the surprises for you as you were doing your reporting, your work.
I'll do two very quickly. One is the first chapter of the book. It's called LOL, LOL. I have two sort of teenage daughters, so LOL, nothing matters lawyering. And that was actually a term, it was written in Lawfare, which is an online post some of you might read, which is amazingly thoughtful writings often by lawyers and legal professors. But it's a description that I
pointed at me. I'm neither a lawyer nor a legal professor, but that's okay. I don't mind them. I just am not one of them. Go ahead.
And it was a description told to me by Erica Newland, a young woman who joined the Justice Department right out of, I believe it was Yale Law School. We were talking as we walked here, a lot of these people that go work for the Justice Department are choosing to not make huge amounts of money in law firms. And she wanted to go into public service. She had a prestigious job in the Office of Legal Counsel. I'm worried about how many people know all this already, but it helps interpret for the Justice Department in any administration what is a constitutional law and what isn't. And she worked through the end of the Obama administration, and she decided to stay because she, was nervous about Donald Trump, stunned that he won, like so many people were in the country. And she's there, and she's so principled, she wouldn't really talk too much about the cases she worked on in the beginning of 2017. But the first thing that came through the door for the Office of Legal Counsel was the travel ban. And the first version of it clearly wasn't constitutional, and you immediately had this dilemma for civil servants, lawyers who'd worked in the Justice Department for Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. And she figured out later, it took her about a year to understand why the travel ban was an example of LOL, laugh out loud, nothing matters lawyering. And there's been talk of Donald Trump and that he's the Roy Cohn sort of strategies of using the legal system to achieve your business goals or your political goals. And so LOL, nothing matters lawyering in terms of the travel ban was a perfect match. The goals of LOL, nothing matters lawyering is to, one, drive the news cycle, get your message out, which the travel ban did magnificently from Trump's perspective. Two is own the libs, get them all riled up, and just work them as hard as you can. And 3 is try to impress Donald Trump, that he would be happy to with like the reaction to what's going on. The goal of Law Nothing Matters lawyering isn't necessarily winning in court. It's not having the best facts. It's not having the best legal argument. It's using the legal system as a political tool to win your political battle against your rival. So I think it's like Roy Cohn 2.0 or 3.0. And I'm so simplistic. My college roommate is sitting back here in the back. He's a good nonpartisan doctor, but he's seen me this way for decades. I was really surprised at this concept. I hadn't sort of, thought of it.
So you didn't think people in Washington could be cynical?
No, I guess that I mean, it's a travel ban. It's not that they could be cynical, but just that, and we're going to get in this whole thing about the belief in liberal democracy and a rules-based system, and how long it will last, how effective it will be, and when one element in the system isn't obeying the rules, how do you respond to that? But I wasn't alone. I'll just say that I had there's Erica Newland, who goes in, and she ends up thinking of herself, worrying that she had become like a mid-level bureaucrat in early Nazi Germany, who was sort of enforcing their rules and processing papers. And Erica Newland's Jewish, but that she ends up resigning because she feels like by trying to refine the travel ban, by trying to make these proposals legal and constitutional, she felt that they were hiding inadvertently Trump's strategies and his lies. She wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about her experience in the Justice Department. George Packer, a friend and a Brooklyn resident, wrote about her in a story for The Atlantic. Then I talked to her. But there was a naivete in the Justice Department workforce. I'll stop. There's another character who told this to me, but this other character thought that the presidency would change Donald Trump, and instead, Donald Trump changed the presidency.
For me, that was one of the big surprises, was the naivete of some of your characters, and they included Jeff Sessions, about Trump. And to some extent, even Bill Barr is naive in a way. But to what do you attribute the fact that these Washington players, who've been around for a long time, actually didn't understand Trump, even after he'd yelled at them a few times?
First, my wife has arrived, so I'm very nervous now.
I'm not sure the segue here, but welcome, though.
And with one of her best friends. So anyway, it's not that Bill Barr and Jeff Sessions happily entered the Trump administration because they sincerely believed that a far-left liberal elite was on track to destroy the United States as it existed. They felt, and I think still feel, that religiously observant Americans are under siege from a Hollywood, driven, again, kind of liberal elite, the culture wars, and all the debate about gender and identity, and so the fascinating thing about it, and part of the book is going, and I met and spent an afternoon in Mobile, Alabama, with Jeff Sessions. He and his wife Mary served me a beautiful lunch. It was like watermelon salad and fresh lemonade, and I could talk more about that conversation. But and then Bill Barr, to be honest with you, I wrote a profile of him. I'm at NBC News now, but I was at the New Yorker previously for the New Yorker. And Bill Barr hated the profile I wrote of him. And I had a couple brief conversations with me, but he just would not speak to me. But Bill Barr he went to Colombia in the middle of the Vietnam War protests. He has distrusted the left for decades. Saw the Watergate reforms as weakening the presidency. We'll get into that more. We have a leading expert on the presidency here. So I guess that there's sincerity on that side. Jeff Sessions isn't sitting around like, well, we can get into child separation, but they're not sitting around thinking, we want to destroy American democracy. Bill Barr's thinking, I'm defending American democracy. And it scares me to see that, to be exposed to that, to realize that, if that makes any sense.
Well, it does, but they didn't understand the extent to which Donald Trump was interested in destroying American democracy.
Correct.
And I mean, they seemed so committed, at least in your portrait, which, by the way, is very persuasive. They were so committed to enacting their agenda that they weren't looking at the fact that they were doing it for somebody who was taking the ground right out from under them.
And that's the best quote in the book. I didn't want to use this so quickly.
Go ahead. It's your book.
Well,
there are a lot of good quotes.
So if you're struggling to, you write 3 years, your wife's like, had it. Honey, one of the first questions was, why do you write the book? And I said, you ask me that, I think, every month. But anyway, in the epilogue, and we'll come back to Barr and Sessions. What I think everyone underestimated Trump. So I went to this I took a elite presidential historian to a very expensive brunch. It was Tim, and asked him, like, why isn't this working? Like, why Watergate worked? It was messy, traumatic for the country, but Nixon ends up resigning. And the quote I shamelessly used from Tim in the epilogue was that Richard Nixon had a sense of shame. Richard Nixon had a sense of history, and Donald Trump doesn't. And that the founding fathers, I'm just trying to get Tim to talk, sort of didn't conceive of, an actor who would act without shame. And then the last thing, I've never interviewed or talked to Trump. I tried many times. I think there's a very good chance he sincerely believes in his mind that he won the 2020 election, that he thinks he's defending democracy. What I've found in my many years of journalism and a time reporting abroad is that there are a handful of people maybe who are sadistic and know they're doing the wrong thing and like it, but the bigger danger with human beings is our ability to rationalize and our ability to make ourselves the hero of our own stories. Anyway, whatever's driving someone, though, to flout election results and flout the law is obviously, unacceptable. But it was a very interesting experience in terms of the psychology of all the different players.
So this could get very depressing. So why don't we talk about a hopeful moment, and then might help us. No, I'm gonna. Okay. So we, as a nation, we had to deal with Richard Nixon, and in response to Richard Nixon's assault on the rule of law and his abuse of power, the country, i.e. Congress and two fine presidents in this regard, we could debate other aspects of their administrations, Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter, both collectively or successively put in place reforms and created what you call in your book post-Watergate norms. Maybe we should lay out for everybody, to remind them of a hopeful era, what they were, and then talk about how they have been undermined. So let's start with that. What were these norms, these post-Watergate norms?
I'm going to try to find a character to talk about post-Watergate norms. One of the challenges of this book is like making the Justice Department lively and exciting. Merrick Garland, who we can talk about at length, gave a very impassioned speech today about the importance of post-Watergate norms. And it was the hero of the 70s is Edward Levy, who's the president of the University of Chicago. Gerald Ford names him the new attorney general. And it was a decision, and just to back up, John Mitchell, Richard Nixon's attorney general, prosecuted the president's political enemies from his office as the attorney general. I didn't really know the history that well. There was many other abuses, the Church Commission and many things that happened during the Cold War, and Hoover, obviously. But, anti-Vietnam War protest groups, he investigated them. Black nationalist groups, he investigated them. And then as Attorney General, members of the Nixon administration who had leaked embarrassing information about the president. And so Ed Levy tried to establish a group of norms where, and it's a confusing job, the Attorney General. It is absolutely proper for an Attorney General to carry out the broad policies of a democratically elected president. Donald Trump won the 2016 election. He won the Electoral College vote. He had a mandate from voters to carry out his policies. We can argue whether it was the travel ban or not. So it was correct for Jeff Sessions to crack down on violent crime. We'd want them to do that. When Barack Obama, I'm guessing because we're in Brooklyn, but if it's a Democratic president, you don't want some career bureaucrat blocking the president from carrying out a policy that, if it's a Democratic president and you support it, you want them to carry that out. Anyway, Levy did that. He went around the country lecturing about this. And then the one thing that a president could not do, and where an attorney general had to resist the president, was when the president meddled in an individual criminal investigation. Because the president, as Nixon did, would try to protect his enemies. Protect his friends and attack his enemies. So you fast forward back to Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions' first day on the job, I can talk about his new chief of staff, a guy named Jody Hunt, who's a character throughout the book, an amazing guy. One of the few people who talked to me on the record. The author's note talks about how everyone is so afraid of being quoted on the record, but Jody Hunt and Jeff Sessions himself described first day on the job, Jeff Sessions gets in. He's a former U.S. attorney in Alabama. He's a lawyer, obviously, Jeff Sessions. And he goes on to become much better known for his ultra-conservative stance in the Senate. But he's told on the first day, Mr. Attorney General, we have to tell you about an ongoing FBI investigation. This is literally late January 2017. And they say to him, and I confirmed it with multiple sources, there is an ongoing FBI investigation of coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. And no one knew about this. Comey had not disclosed it to the president yet. And Jeff Sessions' reaction was, whoa, 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 stop. Do not talk anymore right now. Stop it. Don't tell me more. Because he immediately knew he could not oversee an investigation of a campaign that he was a senior leader of. It's literally there's a whole now, they call it the Justice Manual. It's all these norms over the years that have developed about a fair prosecution. And the example about recusing yourself is, a U.S. attorney cannot oversee a investigation of a campaign they helped lead. It's like basic recusal. And Jeff Sessions stood by that. We all know what happened. Trump was furious at him, belittled him in public, belittled him, in private. And I heard more details about that than I realized. And what's so strange about Sessions was he stood by that. He really believes in the Justice Department. He really is proud of his time in Alabama. I mean, he's more conservative, talks about locking people up. But at the end of our lunch in Mobile, I asked him about Trump, and it's just and he had tried to run again in 2020 against Tommy Tuberville. I don't know if any of you followed this. Trump is out of office, and he just attacked Sessions again, and Tommy Tuberville beats him. At Jeff Sessions' house, it's this simple house, nice, not ostentatious, and he walks you around the room, and he's like, oh, and this chair over here, this is my Senate chair. And it's the chair, I can't remember now, 20 years, 30 years in the Senate. And he's like, and over here, this is my cabinet chair. And that's the cabinet chair from the White House, meetings where he sat as the attorney general in cabinet meetings. And he was the most powerful politician for decades in Alabama, and Donald Trump destroyed him. And when I asked him about January 6th, he said, I think it's being exaggerated. I think it's wrong to call it an insurrection. And I said, well, what about Trump himself and the way he acted then? And in general, he said, well, I think of Trump as more of a blunderbuss. He's a blunderbuss. And he said, the real problem is the Biden family and the level of corruption. And the real outrage here is that I think a couple days earlier, the January 6th indictment had come down, is that he's like, I'm so angry at Merrick Garland and Jack Smith for these charges against President Trump about January 6th. They're really destroying public confidence in the Justice Department. And the real case here is Biden family corruption. And I'm telling you, I could try Hunter Biden today, and get him convicted.
Do you think Sessions is suffering from a political form of PTSD?
Cognitive dissonance is another term. I mean, I'll endlessly try to be fair here. I think it's hard I had one person say to me, and I've made tremendous mistakes. Again, my wife and college roommate will tell you. But I mean, maybe it's hard for human beings to admit mistakes. One person said to me they felt it was, and in a way I salute Mike Pence, who did the right thing on January 6th, who ran against Donald Trump. I know he doesn't want to have lunch with other women than his wife, but he heroically defended the Constitution. He turned on Trump. He did it publicly. And that one person said to me, it might be hard for people to admit that they back someone who turned out to be anti-democratic and that they urge people to vote for him. And Barr, in the end, did the right thing in late 2020.
Well, why don't you share with everyone, because that was another surprise, because there are ample instances in this book of political decisions, partisan decisions by Barr, principally the way he handled the Mueller report, but some of you will remember that, but also some behind-the-scenes things that involved moving U.S. attorneys out of the way because there was about to be an important decision made on the sentencing of a Trump ally, and he didn't want that person to be there. But he did keep two things secret.
Yes.
That the president, former president, wanted to bring out, to use, to weaponize against Joe Biden in 2020, and I didn't know about that. What were those two things?
One was, and again, Barr, what was interesting was and again, the importance of history. The Miller Center, Barr obviously was the Attorney General before, under George H.W. Bush, and he sent federal law enforcement into Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots. So it was fascinating, an oral history of his first time as Attorney General. And then I talked to a lot of people who worked very closely with him, but it was so strange to his public comments. I mean, he called, you might remember this, but COVID restrictions the worst civil rights violation in American history since slavery. He warned about the dangers of mail-in voting, that it would cause massive fraud. He said just crazy things throughout the summer of 2020. But there is this, and I confirmed it, these dramatic, there's concerns. He actually asked the DOJ to look into the accusations of voter fraud in late November. Normally again, there's all these norms, and again, it's so interesting to me, at least, because there's all these thoughts behind these crazy processes. So the Justice Department's supposed to wait, I think, until every state has certified their election results before even launching an investigation into voter fraud. And that's the idea, is to let the states control the results, not have a federal government coming in and changing the outcome. But he did it a few weeks early. The head of the office that looks into voter security resigned over it. And I was like, oh my God, here it is. He's going to help turn the election. And in fact, Barr carried out a very thorough investigation, went in the Oval Office, told Trump that the people who are telling you this, it's in Barr's memoir, are full of shit. People are lying to you. You didn't win this election. And so he does the right thing in the end. And he also, you talking about the special counsel thing?
I'm talking about Durham.
Yes, John
and
Durham.
About Hunter Biden.
Yes. So one of the many things Donald Trump tried to do, and say what you want, he's a sort of messaging savant. He was dying for the Justice Department under Bill Barr in the summer of 2020 to open a criminal investigation into Hunter Biden. And Bill Barr did open a criminal investigation. Actually, no, Jeff Sessions opened a criminal investigation into Hunter Biden, but kept it secret. They didn't tell Trump. Again, Sessions, who's just humiliated, blasted, believes in these ideals of the Justice Department. Barr keeps it secret. And then before the election, he secretly makes John Durham a special counsel. You can look at that two ways. One was that if there's a Democratic president, John Durham will be able to continue his investigation into the Trump-Russia investigation. Another one was that someone close to Barr told me was that you'd have an independent special counsel who Trump couldn't manipulate as much if he did win re-election. But both of those things, and as you know, a special counsel and a criminal investigation involving the Bidens would have been electoral and political gold for Trump, and Barr kept it secret because part of Barr, he really believes in this idea of when it comes to specific criminal investigations, they shouldn't be driven by political timelines.
And this may seem a fantastic, in the true sense of the word, question, but were there guardrails in the first Trump administration? And if Trump were reelected, would those guardrails be there for a second term?
A character that's not in the book, who worked on the National Security Council, I sat in their home, I don't know, in the fall, I think before the election, but it's just because you mentioned the word guardrail. But just a thoughtful person who I know, but who was very a hawk towards China. How about that? I'm trying to protect my source here. But October or so, 2020 says, the guardrails are more intact as the Trump first term is coming to an end than all you people on the outside think. From the perspective of the White House, you see all these checks on the president. And the person swore to me that he's like, if Trump loses, I guarantee you he'll accept the results. And these were people around Trump in the White House. And maybe, look, you can criticize them and whatever, but this is what he sincerely told me at the time. That person that person resigned very soon after January 6th. Oh. But so there was, and we can get into more of this, and it doesn't, but I'm forgetting. The White House counsel, the last one, did really fight Rudy Giuliani on all the election stuff. There were good and bad actors
Cipollone?
here. Yes, Pat Cipollone. Pat Cipollone. Anyway, so the quick answer on the second term is no, there will not be guardrails, and one very basic thing, and I got to keep my answer shorter, is the recent immunity decision by the Supreme Court, which found that the president now, and this gets back to that the Watergate reforms dangerously weaken the American presidency. Bill Barr gave this big speech to the Federalist Society when he was Attorney General that said, this is this enormous country, and you need a strong presidency to hold it together. When there is wartime, Pearl Harbor, when there's civil war, when there's a natural disaster, there has to be a powerful chief executive who can act. And that the Watergate reforms, having special counsels, having an independent Justice Department, having House and Senate intelligence committees that would oversee the CIA, weaken the power of the chief executive. And I think that was the viewpoint that went into this decision, which ruled that any conversation, specifically between the Attorney General and the President of the United States, is absolutely immune from criminal investigation. Because it's all very vaguely written, and we can talk about that. But did John Roberts sit around and think, how can I thwart American democracy? I want to bring a dictatorship to the United States. I don't think he thought that. But there is this view that the country's chaotic and the left is dangerous and an existential threat to the country with its policies, and that's why we have to strengthen the presidency. Can you talk about your view of the Federalist Society?
Yeah, well, I can. Reading the Chief Justice Roberts' decision in Trump versus the United States, I had the feeling that they were writing about a country that they'd never visited, because you don't have to have been the director of the Nixon Library, although I guess it helps, to know something about abuses of power by presidents. You could just listen to some of the tapes on YouTube. And the idea that all of what the framers wanted was an energetic president, and therefore a president should not fear later criminal prosecution lest they not be able to be energetic, seemed to fly in the face of the examples of energetic presidents who had violated the law and abused power and targeted their opponents. And there's lots of examples, and you don't have to be partisan about it. It's not just Richard Nixon. In the era of the imperial, the first era of the imperial presidency, we can talk about it, we're in the second era right now, presidents could wiretap you, say it was a national security issue, and they wouldn't have to go to a court. Presidents could ask to see your tax returns. And if they didn't like you, they could get the IRS to investigate you, to audit you. Presidents could do lots of things in the Cold War because there's a huge gray area that permitted them to do what was necessary to defend our national security. That, frankly, is a recipe for disaster if you have anything but a benevolent dictator. And of course, our presidents weren't dictators, but they're human, and they're greedy, and some of them were bad. And so there were lots of abuses, and not just committed by Nixon, but Nixon took it to a new level. And in response, our government, in a way that we as Americans, if you don't mind a little bit of soapbox rhetoric, should be proud of. It's a great story. That's what I meant about something to be happy about. We don't know, sadly, Edward Levy's name is not remembered. I will tell you that a buddy of mine from college went to law school at the University of Chicago. I went to visit him, and he said, "Do you mind coming with me to a class? I can take you into my," I believe it was constitutional law. I said, "Great, sure." Didn't go to law school. It's not because of this class. The teacher was a man named Edward Levy. I didn't know who he was. He left, he was Attorney General of the United States, and went back to teaching law for the rest of his career. I wish I could tell you that were pearls of wisdom that I listened to, but frankly, I wouldn't say it was above my head, but not something I was focusing on. I remember it being rather interesting. But he is a great hero now that I know what this man has done. But it's not just one man, it's many people. So the challenge for the country is to remember the lessons of the 70s. And one of the changes in our country that is very troubling, and this gets to your question, is that our most powerful people have forgotten the logic of separation of powers. It's painful, isn't it, and frustrating. God, Congress can be so slow, and the paralysis can be awful, and we could keep saying to us, "Oh my God, if they could only, why can't they? Why are they all at loggerheads?" But there is a certain genius to that, because the framers, for all of the weaknesses of their understanding of party politics, because they didn't think it was going to happen, understood that human beings aren't not always working on basis of national interest. But we now have people in the Supreme Court, or at the Supreme Court, or on the Supreme Court, people in Congress whose commitment to a set of ideas is so strong that they are undermining the ability of those branches to put a check on the third branch, or really the second, because it's Article 2 executive branch. And they are people who believe in a set of ideas that's spun by and shared by something known as the Federalist Society. So the basic logic of our framers, which is, I'm not saying that it always worked, because after all, we had a civil war, which is usually considered a failure of a system, right? So it's not perfect, but we reconstituted the system. By the way, not perfectly either, because Reconstruction was undone. Don't get me started about how it took 100 damn darn years. Anyway, it actually makes me sad that it took 100 years to fulfill the promise of Reconstruction. But anyway, that's a different story and a different kind of history. But the fact of the matter is, the separation of powers doctrine is in trouble because of this ideological view that somehow we're better off if our executive branch is unfettered. And I don't know where we go from here, but what are your thoughts on it?
Finally, a short answer from me. Bill Barr and he was, again, openly political. In the summer of 2020, the George Floyd protests are happening, and he would go out and just talk about Antifa, the leftist group, and say they were causing the violence. He was openly political, but one of his beliefs, and a sort of belief in a powerful presidency, the unitary executive, is that the president can have all these powers. They can have improper conversations with their attorney general. It's okay, but we leave it to the voters. And every 4 years, voters can decide, did the president abuse their powers? Did the attorney general?
That's only if they know it.
Well, A, do they know it? And then B, what happens when one of the candidates will not accept the results of the election? And I think that's why maybe Bill Barr kind of drew his line.
So before we go to questions, I want to read you, and I told you I would quote this from you. No. Yes. It's an important book. Okay. In the book, there is this quotation which sets up a question about our society and its ability to deal with enemies inside, enemies of our constitutional system. Quote, "We are seeing a scary example of how liberalism's belief in process itself, rather than the ideals that processes are supposed to help execute, can be easily manipulated by bad faith, far-right actors." Is liberalism and are the institutions created by liberalism up to the task of dealing with those who are going to try to implement, what is it, LOL,
Nothing
matters administration?
They were in 2020. You're going to see me constantly, say this is a half full bottle of water, in that it was a Washington Post story. It's in the book, but I think it was 60 judges appointed by federal and state, appointed by Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. An arch-conservative Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin, a Trump-appointed judge who'd only been in office for a few weeks, all flatly rejected his claims of mass voter fraud. Flatly rejected. In the end, Congress is the right thing. We all remember the horrible events of January 6th. But it's in mid and early December when Trump loses case after case. It was 60 in all, flat out loses them. And then it goes to this Supreme Court. It didn't have the supermajority yet. I'm getting something wrong. But they basically reject that as well. And I completely agree in the separation of powers. What this book doesn't have is sort of simple policy prescriptions about saving our democracy, but 3 branches of government that are equally strong and healthy, more transparency so the public can, I write in the book that the sort of history has shown, whether it's in the United States or elsewhere, that the concentration of power in a president or a chief executive is a route to authoritarianism. So the problem, we can talk about Merrick Garland and the prosecutions, but I feel like in the spring and summer of 2024, the judicial branch has failed, in that the Supreme Court, in the immunity ruling, allowed Trump to delay a January 6th hearing. And you had Eileen Cannon, this judge in Florida, make this extraordinary ruling, which literally said that special counsels were unconstitutional. They've been around for 50 years. They were a key part of Ed Levy and Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter's reforms. And it's another Federalist Society idea. They weren't Senate confirmed, so therefore, and so does that mean the judiciary has failed forever? We could find out in a few months. But when I finished the book, there hadn't been an immunity ruling yet, and Judge Cannon hadn't thrown out the documents case. So that worries me. A broad theme is the hyper-partisanship in our society infecting our institutions, judges' views of the world. And then the book begins with this bitter battle, this come-to-Jesus meeting at the FBI about when to search Mar-a-Lago. It was kept secret. The Washington Post wrote about it first. I just got it in much more detail. And you literally had this deadlock between DOJ prosecutors that were like, we know there's more documents in Mar-a-Lago. We've issued a subpoena. We've given him nearly a year. And there was a bunch of FBI agents led by the head of the Washington field office that were, his name is Stephen D'Antuono. He had the courage to go on the record with me and explain his thinking and why he kept saying, let's wait to search Mar-a-Lago. And, you know, I don't know everybody's political views, but his primary loyalty was to the FBI. He was a public corruption investigator for 27 years, and we'll go to questions, but he kept saying, why don't we negotiate again with Evan Corcoran, you know, the lawyer who was supposed to be negotiating for Trump? Why don't we try to get a consensual search? If we do this non-consensual search of Mar-a-Lago, we're playing into Trump's MO. We're going to just help him say the FBI are a bunch of jackbooted Nazi, you know, thugs. And he kept saying, we got to wait. And then you had DOJ prosecutors saying, no, we're giving him, you know, this is not equal justice under law. We're giving him all these chances we never give anyone else. They investigate people who take classified documents dozens of times a year. But the suspicions were so deep that the FBI agents actually looked up the campaign contributions of their DOJ colleagues. And they found that one of them, a guy named Jay Bratt, had made small donations to Democrats years and years earlier. And they privately talked about this. And they were like, why is this Jay Bratt being so aggressive towards Donald Trump? It slowed the search for a few weeks. In the end, more senior FBI officials overruled D'Antuono. There's only one political appointee in the entire FBI. That's Chris Wray. Chris Wray, though, didn't finally give the order for Mar-a-Lago. It's this amazing, little-known guy, the deputy director of the FBI, the number 2 named Paul Abate. And he says, D'Antuono and the Washington field office, you will go search Mar-a-Lago. And it happens. And the rule of law is sort of upheld. Trump uses it brilliantly to say, I'm a victim of FBI thugs. And just the irony is that, sorry, I can't resist, that D'Antuono, he's at home, and he's there one night, and he's the guy that slowed the search. And Tucker Carlson comes on and does a monologue about Stephen D'Antuono. And he's like, I've looked in the records and all this stuff, and Carlson, and again, an amazing communicator, is like, so let's look at Stephen D'Antuono. Guess where Stephen D'Antuono worked, 2 years ago? He was the head of the FBI field office in Michigan, and he played a role in the arrest of these militia members who were accused of trying to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, which is seen on the right as like a trumped-up and fake case. And guess where Stephen D'Antuono was on January 6th? He was the head of the Washington field office. This is all Tucker Carlson, not me. And guess where Stephen D'Antuono, what role he played? Well, his folks, his men and women searched Mar-a-Lago. And him, Carlson, and Jesse Waters were essentially saying that Stephen D'Antuono, the guy who fought the search, which Carlson didn't know, was part of some deep state plot to frame Republicans. And D'Antuono told me 27 years for God and country. Again, he was a public corruption investigator. He convicted Democrats, he convicted Republicans. And he said, and it was so painful for him, he said, my parents had to see that. My children had to see that, And he said, sorry, I'm getting a little, I sincerely believe in nonpartisan public service. And he said that I was just trying, he saw his role as an FBI agent was being like an umpire at a baseball game. And he said, I was just trying to call balls and strikes. And I was just trying to get everyone to keep playing the game. And then he said it privately, and he didn't want this made very public, but he said, I was just trying to keep everyone from killing each other. And so it's this terrible irony of this guy, and maybe he was wrong. I wrote about him in a book excerpt that ran on the NBC website, and you got all this hate mail from Democrats. There was all this chatter on Twitter saying, that guy's in the tank for Trump. So whatever, Stephen D'Antuono is a hero or a villain. I feel for these public servants. FBI agents don't want political investigations anymore. They see them as career enders. DOJ prosecutors just sit there like kryptonite. Democrats are going to accuse you of not being aggressive enough on Trump. Republicans will say you're being too aggressive. And again, if we don't have nonpartisan civil servants, umpires counting votes, issuing court, rulings, I worry our democracy will cease to function.
Now it's time for questions. If you have any questions.
Wow, I really killed the vibe.
No, you didn't. No, that was very spirited and hopeful. Well, just to,
Barr, you speak about Barr, and that it sounded like you're saying that he genuinely believed that the left was undermining
I
democracy.
can't quite hear you.
Oh, that Barr believed that the left really was undermining democracy, and that sort of drove him. But did you get any sense from him the process or what was underlying that belief? And probably half the electorate's belief in that too, I guess.
He and you should help me, but I think the Federalists and that generation of conservatives see a activist Supreme Court that legalizes abortion nationwide, an activist Supreme Court that legalizes
same-sex marriage?
Same-sex marriage, affirmative action, and they believe that these social changes should happen in a democracy, but they should come through legislation, through laws enacted by the majority of people, and so. And in terms of his, he said something again about the Mueller investigation being like worse than Watergate or close to it as an abuse because he just, many people who worked in the Trump administration, some who turned on him and left, thought it was laughable that Donald Trump would collude with Russia. And liberals clearly thought that was very possible. But they really were like, this is ridiculous. Of course he's not some secret Russian agent. And this is where they accuse liberals of Trump derangement syndrome. So he saw the Mueller investigation as this false, I hate to say trumped up, mechanism to cripple the Trump presidency and block his political agenda. And he wanted, again, he's a devout Catholic and that's his right. But he really feels that religiously observant people of any faith in this country are sort of under cultural siege from the left. And so that was his mission, and if he had to do it, working with Donald Trump, he would do it, and then most of all, to save the presidency.
There are a number of powerful people whose takeaway from the 1970s was that this corrective effort by two presidents and Congress had severely weakened the presidency. One of the most articulate exponents of that view is Dick Cheney. And so what is so remarkable is that Dick Cheney has just endorsed Kamala Harris because of the threat posed by Donald Trump in using the powers of the presidency that Dick Cheney always wanted to be there. So it is one of the most remarkable turnarounds in American history. You have to nerd out a little bit to truly get it, but I just wanted to share this with you. So it's a little project that I haven't done. I'm sure some will do it. I don't know. I'd like to do it, perhaps. I think there is a story here. You should do it. That some of the wisdom, in quotations, of the Supreme Court decision, I think is a product of the fact that a number of the people who supported that view of criminal immunity worked in the White House as presidential lawyers. And I have a feeling that some of this is a reaction to a scandal we've all forgotten, which is called Iran-Contra. I have a feeling that this is a comeuppance for the nation because of an inter-scene debate among lawyers about Iran-Contra. And that's weird and wrong because they've all forgotten Watergate. They're not old enough to have remembered, remembered they were kids, but a number of them were. Some of them were too young for that too. But they are old enough to have been in positions of authority during presidential scandals. And I think their takeaway is completely tone deaf to the nature of abuse of power in America.
Bill Barr was the Attorney General Just quickly, the Iran-Contra scandal, 1992, George H.W. Bush loses the presidency to Bill Clinton in a big shock to many Republicans. Lawrence Walsh, the Iran-Contra special counsel, it was a new indictment or some court filings just a few weeks before the election, I think involving Caspar Weinberger.
Yes, indeed.
And Bush, the father, loses, and they're furious in the White House. They feel that this special counsel has handed the election over to Bill Clinton. So Bush pardons Weinberger with the full support of the then very young Attorney General Bill Barr. And in the pardon, in the signing statement, he said they worried about the criminalization. George H.W. Bush issued the pardons because they were worried that legitimate policy debate was being criminalized, that the president had a right to do the Iran-Contra arms transfer, and it was being wrongly portrayed as a criminal act. But yes, it goes back that far.
It goes back that far, and this notion that it doesn't matter what the president's motives are when they use their constitutional authority, just think about that. The motives don't matter. It means they can use the power, the enormous powers that they have as a result of Article 2 and norms, and it doesn't matter if they're doing it to hurt their enemies. It doesn't matter why they're doing it. It can just be spiteful. It doesn't matter. And that, I think, is an overcorrection because of what they see as unfair criticisms and of their presidents when they were serving them as legal advisors. More questions, please. Right over there.
Thank you. David, guardrails. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the guardrails. You said quite unequivocally that the guardrails have gone, and you cited the immunity decision. What other guardrails have gone, and which would you say are still in place?
And this is Arlene Getz, who's a former colleague of mine and an amazing journalist. We worked at Reuters together. This isn't in the book, but I'll be honest. I think the press is in real trouble. We were a guardrail. We are a guardrail, but the kind of explosion of partisan sort of news and the popularity of it has really, I think, is hurting our democracy, and where large parts of the public simply don't believe what is reported by the mainstream press, and vice versa. And so I was proud to be a sort of straight down the middle reporter at Reuters. I'm proud to be, working as the national security editor at NBC, and as I mentioned, working for Lester Holt. So I think it's a business challenge. The way we consume news is so fragmented now that it's very it's both relatively popular. The NBC Nightly News still gets about 6 million viewers a night, 7 million viewers a night. David Muir always wins 7 million. I like Lester better. But anyway, and Norah O'Donnell gets maybe 4 or 5, but that's a big chunk. That's a huge audience. At his height, Tucker Carlson was getting about 4 million. On her best nights, Rachel Maddow was getting 2 to 3 million. But whether it's Fox or MS or CNN, I don't know, the political elite watches those partisan broadcasts. They seem to have much more impact. We've noticed at NBC that Democrats and Republicans just want to go do an MS interview or a Fox interview. They want to go talk to their political base. They're not as interested in going on Meet the Press on Sunday. Kristen Welker's the new moderator. She tried incredibly hard to get President Biden to do an interview when she took over the job. So it's easier and more profitable to just have someone stand there and offer opinion. It costs a lot of money to send reporters out around the country. So, Fox makes huge amounts of money. It's a very profitable business. MS ratings have been up in this because of, I worked at the New Yorker. We would talk about, people in terms of cable hate watching, that you would just, what does MS cover more than anything else? Donald Trump. And it's sort of a form of hate watching or hate reading. So I don't have a good answer to that. I clearly believe in the kind of straight down the middle news thing, but the numbers are dropping in terms of who reads and watches that sort of just the facts news. Sorry, that was not uplifting, I guess.
No, it's okay. Any other questions?
Right there.
Well,
I'm proud of that. I'm doing that kind of news because I believe in it, and I tried to do it in this book. There was a review that said this is I'm sorry I'm talking too much, but it just said that the book makes it very clear that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, but this is not a polemic. This is a sober work of reporting. And I choked up in front of our daughter when I read that review because it was such what I'd hoped to do.
Just to add, one of the norms is the protection of presidential records. And that's why the court case in Florida is so important, because one of the ways we protect ourselves from abuses is that we find out about those abuses. Sir.
What is your definition of the deep state?
A great question. So the last book I wrote was about the deep state. Originally the deep state was a term that political scientists used for the military in Turkey and Egypt that were blocking the emergence of democracy there. It really didn't become popular in the U.S. Until Steve Bannon used it. It was after Trump had won. It was in November of 2017, and there was I can't remember all the details now, but there was a column written on Bannon's website saying that a great struggle is now going to unfold between Trump and the deep state. And again, it was the military-industrial complex, all government workers everywhere in the country, teachers, police officers, but it was seen as this anti-democratic cabal that would, and sort of the Washington establishment that would stop Trump at all costs. I found that there is a bias, like Steve D'Antuono, the FBI employee, they're biased towards their institution. They will leak stories that help the FBI get a higher budget or put them in a good light. Again, I'm sure there's political bias in the FBI, in the press, everywhere, but it wasn't, I found no evidence of people, conservatives, plotting against Barack Obama in a basement in Northern Virginia, or Justice Department officials secretly plotting against Trump. But it's a very potent term, deep state. Trump continues to use it very effectively, and one of the main things he wants to do, another element of the modern state is a professional, nonpartisan federal bureaucracy, again created by Jimmy Carter and Ford in terms of, it existed before that, going from Tammany Hall, total political patronage, to civil servant tests, people who work for presidents, Republican or
Great
Democrat.
President Chester A. Arthur.
Yes. Fascinating. Aren't you happy?
It's true. One of the most corrupt. He was in charge of the port of New York.
So,
and then turned tables and became president as a result of an assassination, and then creates the civil service.
And James Garfield is assassinated
by
by a political supporter who expected to get a good job from the patronage mill.
Yeah, he
and
didn't get a
one.
job, so he killed the president.
Yes, in
Not
Union
funny, but
Station.
that's what he did.
Project 2025 and an executive order that Trump enacted in his final months in office, it would change the entire civil service. Right now, the president appoints about 3,000 political appointees. The number would change to tens of thousands. So all these people, this guy Jody Hunt, I haven't talked about this much, Erica Newland, Paul Abate, the deputy, the civil servant, career FBI guy who overruled D'Antuono, Paul Abate, who ordered the Mar-a-Lago search, all of them would be replaced by political appointees, chosen by the president, chosen by Donald Trump. That's another guardrail that doesn't exist. Today's impassioned speech by Merrick Garland was, we can have a separate conversation. He was essentially saying he was saying how proud he was of the civil servants in the Justice Department that served presidents of all parties, how important they were in terms of upholding the rule of law and defending democracy. So Garland was trying to say this deep state that Trump attacks, they're not the enemies of the democracy. They're the defenders of democracy. And my question was like, Garland, why didn't you say this earlier? Edward Levy went around the country talking about the importance of fairness in court and fact and nonpartisan public service. And there's sort of an elitism in the Justice Department, the FBI, sitting back, we'll file our court motions. And one former FBI official said that in the digital age and the hyper-partisan age, trust me doesn't cut it. The DOJ and the FBI have to be much more transparent about what they do and legally and properly kind of explain what they do instead of just sitting back and letting their political opponents, particularly Trump, define them.
We have another question? While we're waiting for another question, I'm going to tell you one Nixon story. Yes.
I did have one
Nixon,
question. Yeah.
Nixon believed in the deep state, and this is the irony of all this nonsense. And the connective tissue is Roger Stone. If you know somebody of Roger Stone, who's close to Trump and is actually mentioned in the Senate Watergate report. He's a minor player, but he's a dirty trickster back then, and he continued it. Nixon was angry because he couldn't get the FBI and the CIA to do bad things against his enemies. The FBI, as Hoover got old, all he cared about was staying in office till he died, and so he stopped saying yes to presidents in the way he used to. Because not everything J. Edgar Hoover did was presidentially authorized, but most everything he did was. He kissed up and kicked down. That's the way he operated. So he was saying no to Nixon. And the CIA was saying no to Nixon. And so Nixon said, they hate me. They're the Georgetown set. This is an unelected group of elites who want to undermine my presidency. So he creates something called the Plumbers, because he wants to have an intelligence, he wants an organization that can do dirty tricks. And the feds, the civil servants won't do it for him anymore. And many Nixonians left that era thinking that there is a deep state of intelligence and FBI officers who will not corrupt, will not do the bidding of the president when he wishes to engage in corruption, and that's wrong. That is a through line to today, because that's exactly the view that Donald Trump has. These people should be willing to go after my enemies because they are my FBI and CIA. And when they don't, they're the deep state. Do we have another question? I believe there's.
For two more questions. Here's one, and then this will be the last one.
Hi. Thank you for an excellent lecture. What's troubling me, President Trump has threatened to weaponize the judicial system, and I take him at his word. And the question is, what happens if he gets elected, God forbid, and and he does in fact weaponize and does in fact go after his enemies as he's promised? What do we do? What practical things do we do in order to prevent this from turning into an authoritarian state?
We had coffee before this event, and this is the question we feared most.
Yes. Oh, we didn't fear it. We were puzzling it through because it's the question.
We had double espressos, both of us.
Which should help us answer the question.
They've faded completely at this point. And one of the things about LOL, nothing matters lawyering, is I think that Donald Trump's views everybody is corrupt. Everybody's lying. Everybody's, New York real estate. Everybody's exaggerating the square footage. Everybody's, cutting the deal this way or that way to help themselves. So I'm not trying to excuse it. So, look, to be, you were sitting at the diner just down the street. I was like, vote. Like the thing that, what do I do if I'm asked, like, what's the answer? And that's an easy answer as we sit here several weeks away.
You had an answer.
beyond vote?
It's a very good answer. I could add to that. We could send a copy of this book to everybody in
No.
7 states.
No. No,
But that's
I think we have to accept. Look, if we have to trust me and my hokey, nonpartisan, election clerks example. If election clerks and judges and they all say Donald Trump has won, then he has won. He is the president of the United States. You then engage in following the guardrails and the rules of democracy. You cover that presidency aggressively if you're a journalist. If a judge, I hope, is following the law. I'm going to let Tim go here because I don't have a good answer to this. I mean, it's a liberal society, a rules-based order. What do you do when there's a player that doesn't obey the rules? When do you stop obeying the rules? And it's a dilemma for me personally. I would want to use journalism to fight. My wife has heard this. It's like if Trump wins, game on. Like we are going to report the hell out of that next administration. And I have a plan, like already with like the national security team at NBC News. I have a reporter who covers immigration, and we are ready. We have a team ready. I mean, we will cover the largest mass expulsions in American history of Trump thinks it's higher, 11 million people systematically being expelled from this country. And we're already kind of bracing for that. Very strong coverage of how he uses the DOJ and FBI. It's not a good answer for you, but I'll stop, and I don't know if Tim has any thoughts.
Yesterday was the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. And I remember thinking that I despised the use of waterboarding more than I despised the person that they were going to waterboard, and I despised the person they were going to, actually that wasn't just one, but I'm thinking of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who came up with the idea of what was called the Plains Operation. And why did I despise it? I despised it because I didn't want to become like them. Even though horrible human beings, barely human beings, I didn't want I didn't want us to be like them. So the answer is, if the former president becomes president again, I think we have to enforce the rules because we don't want to be like that. Anarchy just begets anarchy. Okay, and it's not to say that morality isn't really going to be on one side as opposed to other, because I don't believe in both sidesism. There weren't good people on both sides at Charlottesville. But I mean, let's keep in mind, those of us who believe in a democratic and constitutionally viable country don't want to be like those who don't. So it's hard because I'm suggesting self-restraint, but I think you just be very energetic and be very energetic about what it means to be American and what rules and norms you expect us as Americans to uphold, and be powerful and loud, and that's what you do. You don't want to let yourself become like the people that you see as enemies.
Here. All right, yeah, here's the PS question, the last question.
A happier one, I hope.
Hi. I don't know if it's going to be a happier one. I'm curious, how much do you think, because you were kind of referred to the election being protected by liberalism or saved by liberalism. How much would you say is that a genuine interest from liberalism in upholding law and truth, and not just a want to maintain power?
I think I want to be more optimistic and say that I think one of the miracles of this country has been the peaceful transfer of power, and I don't, look, there's been election fraud and many questions. I would say most modern elections, and now being at a very large network, we're going to have people from NBC it's only 26 counties, but in these 26 counties to be our eyes and ears of those counts that matter the most. And there all kinds of different NBC reporters have been flown out to meet with the election clerks. They're in the 7 battleground states, but to just independently watch what happens. So I guess we're struggling in terms of truth and fact, getting people to agree on it. A lot of bad information's on the internet. That's a separate conversation. But I think it's one of the lessons of the book is that it turned out, and you can have something more uplifting, that I would criticize the folks who decided that the simple answer was criminally prosecuting Trump. It turned out it was a lot harder to prosecute a former president who's going to have a ton of lawyers, the court legal system set up to help the defendant, and obviously he effectively used delay, and he was helped with delay by Judge Cannon in Florida and by the Supreme Court. And I had Justice Department officials say, we feel like, we're being asked to solve the country's political problems through the legal system, and that the DOJ and the courts aren't the right mechanism to do that. We should, solve it through elections. So I guess I'm desperately grasping at an election. There's still time to, I'm saying vote for people who support Donald Trump. Like, at this point, how charged things have become and the stakes, it's vital for everyone to express themselves through their vote, to have the highest turnout, ever in American history, because I've seen civil wars in other countries and covered them, and I just worry. I think we're at least at hyperpartisanship paralyzing our politics, and I worry we could approach violence. But again, Erica Newland, Jody Hunt, Stephen D'Antuono, I don't find dark conspiracies. I find people trying to do the right thing, believing in our system, believing in our country,
by the way,
democracy.
And we're talking about liberalism, not necessarily liberals, because some liberals can play power games too and have sharp elbows and don't always play by the rules. This is about a belief in a system that can be reformed. Okay, it's not a belief in a system that's perfect and the status quo must remain, and that that there aren't inequalities. And no, it's a system that is reformable, and that needs to be maintained, as opposed to a belief in anarchy, and some of you might remember Hobbes, but a world where the most powerful get everything all the time and bullies win. But we don't, we'll see what happens in a few weeks. One of the great questions, and it's in the book, and it's something for you to consider as you read this book, is did the Garland Justice Department make a mistake in proceeding with these cases against Trump? Because Trump has weaponized, I'm not talking about the assassination attempt on him, which was truly a source of victimhood for him, but he has made himself out to be a victim because of these cases.
This is the last second I'll let you go. And this is sort of where I end up, but it's about Merrick Garland's personal view of the rule of law, being that everyone is judged fairly before the law, that Donald Trump deserves a fair trial. So I'm sure many of you know Garland's personal history, but his grandmother escaped the Holocaust, and she survived because she came to the United States, a country that upheld the rule of law. She was clearly faced discrimination as a Jew in the United States, but she was not murdered. She was safe. So his very existence as a human being is due to the rule of law. He completely believes this. And I spent a lot of time around his inner circle, and I asked them, this is, you sit back and Garland's boring and he doesn't give enough. He actually, he has given more speeches than Ed Levy. No one understands that he's not doing a good enough job explaining the rule of law in the Justice Department and how it has to be independent. But I would say, isn't the Justice Department in a way like they're being attacked by partisan actors, by Trump. Don't you have one hand tied behind your back? And Garland has said to aides, it's true. The Justice Department does have a hand tied behind its back when it comes to getting in these battle with partisan political actors. But Garland has told aides, I will never allow, he said a version of this today, it's the last words in his speech today, I will never allow the Justice Department to be used for political purposes. You know, the moment that the Justice Department engages in partisan politics, that, he's told aides, that will be the end of the rule of law.
David, it is time for you to sign books. I want to thank David for writing this book. I want to thank you for listening to this discussion, and I want to encourage you to go and purchase one of these books, and David will gladly sign them for you. And don't forget to vote. Good night.
Thank you.